So success in vibe coding isn't just about going with the flow. You can dramatically improve your results with well-defined planning, but how exactly do you create the plans that can guide the AI tools successfully? Today we're talking to Dylan Davis, a founder of Gradient Labs and a specialist in structured AI workflows. We're going to learn about his approach to guiding models through AI guided interviews, blueprints for execution, and roadmaps that keep sessions focused. So Dylan, one of the things that I found super interested about the work that you've been doing on vibe coding was the thinking that you had about the AI spectrum and the distinction between where the tools are today and where they're going. So maybe you can start by talking about that and where you think the future is headed.
See me?
Yeah, I can see you. Sorry. There you are.
Beautiful. I just want to double check. All right. So the future of vibe coding. I think the future becomes obviously more agentic. And what does that mean? Because everybody talks about it. So it's basically the ability to code autonomously where there's minimal human oversight. Because right now with vibe coding, there's a spectrum, right? So there's human oversight on one side, completely autonomous on the other. Right now we're moving on that spectrum from left to right. And as we move on that spectrum, we're becoming less and less involved because the AI is becoming more and more intelligent. And a few examples here. So oftentimes people may hear of Cursor, Windsurf, Klein, Aider. All of these tools sit on the left-hand side because you're directly involved with maneuvering and manipulating the AI. As we move on that spectrum, we have Devin in the center, which is more autonomous because you send it off to do a thing. We have then Claude Code, which is more agentic, so you send that off to do something. And then we have Codex from OpenAI. Each one of these tools are moving on that spectrum from left to right, becoming more autonomous. So in the future, we're likely to have a situation where we ask not one, but many AIs to go off and build different features of an application. We walk away, we go do something else, drink coffee, play with our kids, whatever else, come back a few minutes or a few hours later, and then you have a fully blown, not just built application, but a fully blown tested and deployed application. So that's probably, I don't know, guess predictions, 1 to 2 years out, where that works more reliably. Did I lose you, Ray?
So today we actually have sort of we're in a different place than that. We have people doing individual sort of vibe coding examples, and then we also have the professional developers. So there's kind of like a chasm between these two sort of ends of where we are. I love where you're going with the future. I think I want to say I agree 100%. I think that people don't see it quite yet. So how do we get there? Like maybe can you break down a little bit of the steps to going from where we are today to tomorrow?
From the picture I just painted?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that needs to be improved, but there's a few things that need to be improved specifically. One is the AI's ability to reason effectively over a long time frame, and not just reason, but specifically reason on tools to use. So right now, Claude Sonnet 4 is probably one of the best models to call a variety of tools over a long context or a long conversation. Most tools, when you call a subset of most models, when you call a subset of tools, most models can call maybe 2 to 3 tools in a single flow, and it works. But once you get to 5 to 6 to 10, they all start to decay in their ability to call those tools effectively and to call them when they need to call them. So I think as we increase our ability to call more tools for longer timeframes, those futures will manifest. That's one reason. Another one is instruction following. So oftentimes when you ask a model to do something, depending on the model you're asking, it'll either will follow the instructions or it won't. GPT 4.1, Claude Sonnet 4, Gemini 2.5 Pro, sometimes those models are really good at following instructions when you ask it to do something. And that's because of how they were trained. So these are two areas or benchmarks I'd recommend people to watch for, is the effectiveness of tool calling with reasoning and in following instructions. If you can do those two things effectively over a long time frame, then we get to see the future that I want to have Jarvis and all that fun stuff.
That's pretty cool. I'm actually super excited about that future. So one of the things we that I heard you talk about in your course was sort of the original concept from Andrzej Karpathy about vibe coding and how he defined it. He talked about going with the flow and letting the sort of results that you get, guide you towards where you want to be. But the approach that you offer sort of emphasizes structure a little bit more. Are you sort of killing the vibe with too much planning? Can you talk about the value add of that structure?
Ray, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody tell me I'm killing the vibe. I'm the exact opposite, Ray. I bring the vibes, man.
Really?
So that's a
They
that's a
tell
great
me all
point.
the time. So I mean,
No, it's a great point you're making. So right now, as the models stand, you kind of have to kill the vibes if you want to build an application that's I would say a proper utility that a lot of people get benefit from. But if you're building a toy application or prototype, you can definitely vibe your way to something that is a prototype you can play with. And that's where the models are now. And this goes back to the point I made previously, is as the models get more advanced and as they get more sophisticated in their ability to call tools and instructions, etc., you can lean more onto the vibes, and you have to be less hands-on. So that goes back from the human oversight autonomy. So right now we're kind of in the middle of that spectrum. So there has to be more oversight, less autonomy if you want to build production-ready applications that enterprises can benefit from. And that's kind of the reason why I have such a strong process. And that's also why a lot of AI engineers that you talk to in Silicon Valley and at these AI startups, they have a lot of processes and documents and things they follow when vibe coding, because they want to ensure that the application that's built is robust, tested, and deploys effectively. But in the future, as these become more sophisticated, we'll become heavier on the vibes. So less on the
Mhm.
vibes now, but in the future will be more vibey.
Yeah, because as somebody who has been vibe coding for a bit, I can tell you the very first time you do it, you sort of go with the vibes and then the whole thing breaks down. Like it doesn't, none of the tools know what to do. They get confused. Like when you make a second call to another, to another sort of session, they forget what they did on the first session and they start like redoing or redesigning things. So you very quickly find out that you do need a little bit more structure. So anybody who's been doing it for a while, they know like, whoa, I need to do some system prompts, or I need to sort of give the AI something to refocus and understand that these are the parameters that I wanted to stick by. So I definitely have run into that for sure. But what happens when maybe halfway through like a vibe coding session, you have a good beginning already planned, but then you realize that that plan is no longer working, or maybe that it's generating bad results?
Yeah, and that's going to happen almost every time. Like if you're building anything that's of substance. So
Mhm.
it's that is the art of being a high quality vibe coder. That's how I think about it. So there's a variety of things one can do depending on how the AI goes off the rails. You'll want to divert it back with different tactics. So, for instance, if you're having a long conversation and in your end cursor or some other tool, and you've had maybe, I don't know, 20 minutes of conversation. If that conversation goes off the rails, the reason that's occurring likely is because of the context window for that AI has been completely flushed with data, and you need to refresh the conversation to solve that problem you're going off the rails with. So in that case, you might say, I'm going to start a new conversation. I'm going to actually ask this AI to then summarize the previous conversation that I can then copy and paste into the next one. And you can refresh that context window, which increases the likelihood of you achieving whatever thing you're trying to achieve with that AI. That's one way. Another way is if you have a really robust bug you keep running into and none of the AIs are solving it. There's a variety of ways you can actually solve that issue. One is taking the entire code base and running it through a thing called a serialization tool, where you basically compress the entire code base into a text file. You can then throw that into a different model outside of Cursor, such as Gemini 2.5 Pro, Cloud4 Sonnet, etc. And some people ask, why would I want to do that? Like the AI already has access to the code. Why would you go out of Cursor and go somewhere else? Well, Cursor has an abstraction layer between you and the model. And that abstraction layer is likely a bunch of system prompts, tools, etc., that's fitting into the context window that you're unaware of. It's behind the scenes. So sometimes, if you want to get a fresh conversation that's just you and the model, no abstraction between the two of you, you can take that tool and you can use a tool like Yeek, so Y-E-K. You can turn the whole thing into text, throw it into Gemini 2.5 Pro, and likely solve the problem that you've been running into consistently over time. So this is just like, those are just two of probably like 15 different things one can do. And that's the art of vibe coding, is figuring out how to steer the AI in the direction you want it to go when it goes off the rails.
That's a really good point, and I think a lot of people sort of miss that, the fact that you don't have to use, just one AI tool. So a lot of times I'll sort of, quickly scaffold something like on Bolt or something that is really good at designing things and gives me a great starting point, but then I'll jump into Cursor because I know that once the context has been set up properly, then something like Cursor is going to give me more pro tools since I'm more of a traditional developer, and I can kind of continue with the second thing. And then there's like sort of tertiary tools that you can throw on top of those things. So you can do something like Codex, which will actually can monitor like the repo that you're working with, and then sit there and continue to find potential improvements that you can do. So it behaves more like an agent. Or maybe you go to something like Cloud Code, that the Cloud Code, that is the terminal tool that can help you do some additional things. Like Cloud Code works kind of in a more agentic way, but it's also like a pseudo vibe coding tool, but it's really for when you want to get to the next stage. So that sort of context switching between kind of an original tool and then another tool. And I think you talk a lot about how different models, I think you mentioned some of them, some of the options that people use are better at different things. So maybe you can go over some of the tools that you really, really love, and when you perhaps context switch to something else.
Yeah. So do you want to go over tools or models or
You
both?
could start with tools, and then we can move over to models specifically. So
Okay.
so yeah.
So I think a lot of the things you stated are valid in the way I think about it. It's important to know that the best way to learn any of this stuff is just through experience. And the beautiful thing about using these tools is they're really straightforward to use. It's like talking to a really smart person.
Mhm.
And you just talk to the smart person over and over and figure out different ways to ask them and talk to them, and it'll figure out how to create cool things. Um, so for the point you've made, I would say Replit, Bolt.new, Lovable, all of these web browser based coding agents, they're very good at creating dashboards and websites that I've found. And it kind of like coming to the mockups and the visuals, I recommend using those tools to create the mockup, the visual, of figuring out this is what I want it to look like. Once you've established that visual, then you can export, like you said, the code from there. Most of these tools allow you to do that. Once you've exported it, you can then import it into Windsurf, Cursor, Aider, Klein, all these other tools that are more local based. And you can then build out the backend and the logic associated to the application to make it function and work the way you want it to. So that's kind of the way I picture the two of these. And then also you can start, I've started playing with Claude Code as well. You can bring that
Mhm.
in to tinker with. I would kind of bolt it into the other ones that I've mentioned previously that run locally and build the logic and backend. And depending on the app that you're building, you might need to subscribe to the higher end tier,
Yeah.
especially if you're going to code a lot. So it's $200 a month. And I've noticed that a lot of these tools have that now. So Cursor has
Mhm.
Cursor Max, Windsurf has something similar. So all these tools are coming out with these max plans that are $200 around. That's kind of the
Mhm.
range. And that's for people that are going to probably vibe code a lot. So it's
Mhm.
not everybody needs to do that. I'd recommend most people can probably get away with a free version if you're just building a prototype. But if you want to build something of substance and you're going to do a lot of talking to the AI over a couple of days, then you
Mhm.
may want to bump your subscription up so you don't hit any caps or anything like that.
I think that one thing that people miss is that a lot of the tools that you already have, like say if you had just had the regular Claude, like the chatbot Claude, or perhaps you have ChatGPT or Gemini, like those tools actually can do some vibe coding. So Claude, for example, just improved artifacts so that it behaves more like a cloud coder. I'm sorry, like a vibe coder. So I think that's not a bad place to start if you're just getting going and you already use ChatGPT. It has the same sort of tooling that can generate things for you. It's actually quite good. It just doesn't have it's not really for a specific project. It doesn't talk well to projects. Although now they have added connectors that will connect you to GitHub, let you like download a repo, like work on the project. But I think like if you start where you are already, and a lot of people already know how to like just prompt. So start with a prompt. I always tell people find some Excel spreadsheet that you use all the time, drop it into like ChatGPT, and ask it to build you a dashboard. That's a good place to get going. And then practice modifying it. It's part of your plan. So you're going to get a good amount of modifications. And then go to maybe some of the beginner platforms. I think Bolt is a really, really good platform. Lovables also, both of those are really great for people who don't know anything and they just want to do something. They don't even want to see the code potentially. And then you can move on to something like Windsurf or some of the other tools that have more developy type things to it. But start where you're at. If all you know is like a chatbot, do some dashboards, have it like I think Gemini also does a super good job of when you do deep research, you can ask the tool to build you a website, to build you like an infographic. And those are pretty amazing. And they can kind of show you what you're able to do immediately. So and then move on. Like if you have an idea of an app that you need to build, give Bolt a shot. Give something else a shot, and then move on to something. If you're a developer, maybe you start with like V0. Maybe you start with Cursor. Again, I think there's a benefit, as you said, to actually starting with one tool and then move into another one, and considering adding like a third tool for more pro features or for sort of monitoring of the project. But
Yeah.
that sort of yeah, that's how I kind of think of the things, the
Yeah.
projects.
So I would actually jump in and say so for me, I started with just ChatGPT writing scripts.
Yeah.
So like I'm talking about all these fancy tools and building these fancy apps and stuff. Like I started out just talking to ChatGPT, having it write a bunch of Python scripts for me. And I think that's a great place for a lot of people to start, especially in their jobs. Like if you do something
Mhm.
that's repetitive and you do it more than 3 times, there's a good chance you might be able to automate that with just having ChatGPT or Claude write some Python and
Mhm.
then automate the processing of that data in some way, shape, or form.
It's
Um,
a really
yeah.
good Python it's developer. It's surprisingly good. I needed to do some reports with like the GitHub REST API yesterday. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to like I created myself an issue to take care of it. And I'm like, I wonder if ChatGPT will just do it for me. And sure enough, I just told it, hey, this is what I need, and boom, like 3 minutes. So find the quick wins, find where some of these tools can generate something that's productive. And I think you'll get hooked and you'll go, what else can I do with this? And you'll move on. So you talked also, in addition to tools, you talked about models. So let's talk about the different models, and maybe you mentioned a little bit of their differences. So tell me about how you see them and what advantages they had a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So I break them into two categories, planning and execution. So the planning side is before we actually start coding anything. So these are like the really smart models that help me create a roadmap and understanding of which direction we're going. And that's going to be the biggest and smartest models. So Claude 4 Opus, Gemini 2.5 Pro, and O3. Those are kind of the three that I go to often. And in the planning stage, it'll help create a specification of what I want to build. So specifically, what are we trying to achieve? It'll create a blueprint of how we actually go to build that thing. And once we've done the reasoning and planning, then I pass that off to the executors. And these are the
Mhm.
different models that code for me when we're actually doing the actions. And these models tend to be GPT 4.1 and Claude Sonnet 4. Those are the two I go to. And you may ask, why do you choose these categories? And why do you put these models in these sections? So on the left-hand side on my left-hand side, maybe your right-hand side, I don't know. So the reasoning and planners, the reason I choose those is they tend to be very strong at obviously reasoning through a long time frame, but also their output window for context is usually larger. Specifically for Gemini 2.5 Pro, they can go up
Mhm.
to around 65,000 tokens. So they can write and talk a lot before they stop. That's important for planning because you can get a lot of detail. On the executor side, they're going back to the thing I mentioned previously. They're good at following instructions and good at calling tools. And both GPT 4.1 and Cloud Sonnet 4 are both really good at that. And I found myself recently in the last week or two heavily using Sonnet 4.
Mm.
Um, and actually, it's every other model before Sonnet 4. I never used YOLO mode. So YOLO mode, if you're not aware, so they're like for people that haven't used these tools, there's different names for it, but I just call it YOLO mode because it's kind of chaotic, where you allow the model to go off and code without any intervention. So usually it asks for approval. So it writes something that says, "Would you like to do this?" Or it does a terminal command that says, "Are you want to accept?" etc. And you just basically incrementally track and say yes, no, yes, no. And there's a YOLO mode you can switch on in some of these tools where it just goes off and does the thing without you intervening. And I found that I trust Sonnet 4 more than most models to go off and do the chaos. And yeah, it's let me down a few times, but not as much as other models. So yeah, there's a little fun fact about Sonnet 4.
Super cool. Yeah, I haven't really used Sonnet 4 as much just because I have like pro accounts for ChatGPT and Gemini. So one of the things that I love about Claude is that there is actually a website where you can have it take a look at a prompt that you have created and improve on it. So there, if you get the developer version of Claude, then it has this prompt generator, and basically you describe a basic task here, something like build me a Tetris game, something like this, and then you say generate, and it's going to take that basic concept and sort of expand it and make it add variables to it so that you can reuse it later on, really define sort of the idea further. So this is a great place to start if you are trying to figure out how to build the thing that you want to do. You can give it a simple prompt, and then it's going to sort of give you a more professional version of it. Notice it added like a couple of variables here, and then it's going to create that prompt, and it has like all these amazing tools for evaluating the prompts. So you can ask it to generate some test cases for each one of those things. So since it added these two variables, it's going to generate samples for filling those variables out. Here's the game features. And then you can ask it to run multiple generations. So you can say, okay, I want to see how, if I run this 50 times, how it's going to do, if there's going to be any problems. Because that's another thing. Sometimes you create a great prompt, but then you run it and you can't, you're like, wow, this has worked great one time, but every other time that I've tried it, it's really horrible. So by using this tool, it kind of gets you a little bit farther, and then you can go in and edit that. And you're right, a lot of these tools are better at reasoning. So if you look at sort of the ChatGPT tools, this 4.0 is kind of a good immediate doer, and then there's multiple levels of O models, which are the reasoners, and then there's like the specialized models. Like 4.5 is really good for writing, and then 4.1 is good for programming, which is obviously what you're trying to do as well. So switching to that model, it's going to be a better coder. And then in terms of like Gemini, since the other one that I really love, 2.5 Pro is fantastic. It's like, to me, it's the best developer, pound for pound. And some of the other thing you have to consider is, well, if you're, so let's say that you're building some like an actual application that perhaps uses AI. In that case, you have to look at the things like how much is, say, an application that uses AI going to cost. And so that's why this artificial analysis is a great website, because you'll find out that, okay, it's for planning, that's great. For producing the application, that's one thing. But what if I want to include AI features? And this will kind of break down which model, the speed of the models, and then which models will cost you more if you're generating something that requires AI in the application itself. So another really good thing to look at as well.
Yeah.
So,
There's
you know,
there's actually two things I'll add to that. So OpenAI has a very similar tool to Claude. So it's in the playground, and it's a generator just like that. So
Mhm.
it's a prompt generator that generates a prompt specifically for their models. So Claude and OpenAI, their models, they tend to favor different types of delimiters. So delimiter is basically a way to segment a prompt. So what you saw in Claude was XML tags,
Mhm.
and then usually with OpenAI's models, they tend to favor Markdown. So those are the two
Mhm.
different variations of delimiters for prompts. And what they did for the Claude one, they added structure and context. So if you look at both of the outputs from these, and this is often what I do, is I'll do both generators for Claude and OpenAI. I'll run the same situation, and I'll check to see the structure and see which one I prefer. I'll take the best of both, and that will be my system prompt.
So
That's
I think
one thing.
that's a great point, that you
Yeah.
shouldn't just be looking at one thing. You should sort of take a look at the different options and see which ones work better for you, and kind of understand the differences between the models themselves, which will make a big difference, when you are developing the applications. And then just a lot of experience, like you said, just practice a whole bunch. So when we're really working on an enterprise environment, a lot of
Mhm.
times you have this division currently. I'm sure eventually maybe this will go away, between like the development teams and the management. The thing is that now we have managers who have the ability to vibe code themselves. So how does that change that relationship between the two, and how do they communicate, at least for the time being, until the AIs are smarter?
So let me try to understand, like, or I'll reword the question. So is it that if managers can vibe code themselves, will there not be a need for developers someday?
No, no, no. It's more like, okay, so managers can already vibe code. They might not know it, but they can already build like dashboards. They can
Yeah.
throw up like Bolt. In a world where they can do that, they haven't been able to do that before. Now they're going to go to their development team maybe, and they're going to say, look at this great thing that I built. And the development team's going to sigh and tell them, well, you need all these security features that you haven't thought of. Like, you don't even know how to prompt for that. Like, how
Yeah.
does that relationship now change, where the managers now have superpowers and they kind of begin the conversation at a whole different level,
Yeah.
basically?
I mean, I would say if you're a good collaborative developer, you would be excited about this. And
Mhm.
reason being is that your manager is coming to you with a better ask. Because from my experience, so I studied computer science, I was a developer for a few years, all that stuff. And oftentimes I would have product managers and managers come to me and say, hey, we want to like do this thing. And the thing they asked for was extremely vague, way too high level, and they
Correct.
didn't think through the 85 steps that would be considered of actually doing this thing. The good thing about prompt engineering and vibe coding in general is they get to experience some of the specifics and the context and the pain associated to building that thing they're sharing with me. So there's more empathy in what they're asking for, and there's a better question they're asking. So I'm sure like a lot of engineers, like it's all about the question that's being asked, especially like in the past when you went to Stack Overflow and somebody asked like a really dumb question, everybody would be like really upset and not answer, or answer in like bad ways. And it was around like asking the right question when you should ask the question. So I think it should improve the dynamic between the two because you have more empathy from the manager and better questions being asked. And then as a developer, obviously there's still a need for
Mhm.
security and to build a more robust, scalable application that can be run in parallel and do all the other things. But I think it's also important to accept, because I know there are some developers in the world that are kind of counter vibe code. They're like, oh, vibe
Right.
coding is a waste of time. And you're just going to break stuff. Well, it's one of those situations. I forgot the I did a video on this. I forgot what the analogy was, but it's like first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they hate you, then they like something else, and then they join you. Like that whole like process.
Mhm.
That's probably what's happening right now. So developers first ignored it because they thought it was silly. Then they laughed at it. Then they hate it. And like the whole journey happens with any type of transformation that happens and fundamentally changes the way that we do a certain function in life.
Yeah, so definitely I think that those conversations, I think the important thing is that they need to start happening so that developers understand. I went to my doctor the other day, and when I got there, he started going over like, the annual test results. No big deal. But I told him, like, of course, I got the test results and I put them in ChatGPT, and I already knew some things about what he was going to say, and he hadn't thought about that. And he said, well, man, I have to now assume that people are coming in with some higher level knowledge of where they were when I was the only one giving them information. People already coming in, they're looking up the medicines, they're looking up the, running all the test results. By the time they get here, they're going to be just at a different level. So those conversations are going to be different, and I think it's the same thing for developers and managers and designers or whatever the team is. Hopefully they can work in a way that helps them develop better conversations that are just some in a different place than they have been. So what about this thought that some people have where citizen developers deliver 30% of all the AI automation apps? I really do think that the kind of things that people normally ask for, a lot of them are going to be taken care of by themselves. Say a dashboard for some data that maybe is not something that you need for somebody to develop. So, but we might end up in a future where maybe developers are not needed as much, or perhaps the AI is doing a lot of the work. How should people prepare for this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the obvious answer is just to play with the tools and get better at using them. Because the closer you are to the edge, the more accurate your prediction of the future is. And from what I can see, some of the best engineers at these AI companies, they tend to be context engineers. So people talk about prompting engineering, and they talk about AI engineers, et cetera, et cetera. But context is the key to a successful AI application. And most
Mhm,
applications in the future will have some form of AI. And when it comes to context, you need to be able to orchestrate
mhm.
what data, when it like which data you pull, when it comes in, dynamically change that over time. I kind of think of it as like a water bender, an
Mhm.
airbender, like when they're like doing the
Yes.
water and like flowing it around.
That's
So
right.
like the water is the data and the context. And if you can flow that context specifically into the AI at the right time, that in itself is going to make for a more effective and exciting experience for the user that's using that AI agentic application. So as an engineer, as a developer, you need to get good at not just utilizing these AIs, but also orchestrating data into them to get the most out of them. And like that for me is probably going to be a critical function in the future that most, if you want to be technical and you want to still work in like the developer space, then that's going to be probably a critical skill set to have.
Definitely. And I always tell people, you didn't start programming because you love typing. You got into programming more than likely because you wanted to solve some sort of problem, and you discovered that the computer is like this really amazing tool for getting something done. Like I remember One of the very first apps that I built was like a little sort of art drawing program on an Apple IIe, but way back when there's no mice, so you had to move with the keyboard and stuff. And it was just something that I wanted for myself, and I thought that's really what got me excited about programming. That hey, I could build something, not that I could type a bunch of code or read a bunch of manuals. It was the fact that I could solve a problem. So I think like if you focus on the problem solving aspects, I definitely don't think we're going to be typing a lot longer. It's already happening, and you learn, as you said, to orchestrate the different pieces because now one of the things that really surprised me about the Codex tool from OpenAI was that I pointed that tool at a repo that I thought was pretty perfect. Like I knew a couple of errors that were there, and it found like all these spelling mistakes that I had no idea were there. Right? I wasn't expecting it to do that at all because I'm like, oh yeah, I've checked the site many times. It's gone through Q&A and whatever, but it found things that I didn't even know were there, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing because the tools can now just kind of monitor as you say, even as you submit code, they're going to monitor. You're going to set them up with parameters, and they're going to start to be able to improve and potentially self-improve. But that ability to sort of problem solve and understand what works, as we mentioned, understanding what the different models are good at doing, I think that's maybe the next programming and developing text. And I also think that the next generation of junior developers are just going to be vibe coders, people that learn to vibe code because they wanted to solve a problem. Same thing that happened, when I was growing up and learning programming. And then they solved the problem and that got them really excited. And then they did something else. Then eventually they're like, wow, I better learn this GitHub thing. I have no idea what that is, but I'm going to check that out. And they learn more and more. So I think also that junior developers have to be like at a different level, just in the same way as managers as well.
Yeah,
So
it's there's a famous sci-fi author, I forgot his name. Probably should remember, but there's a quote of the future is already here, just not evenly distributed.
that's great. I
And
don't know that. I don't know that quote.
and the point you just stated is that in the future, like junior engineers will be vibe coders. That's already happening. Like I know of at least 6 companies right now that are solely hiring engineers that know how to properly vibe code. So it's like this is it's a happening, and it will continue to happen. That kind of thing.
Interesting. So one last thing about the process that you've built that I thought was fantastic. People should totally check out your course. It's really great. I really enjoyed it as somebody who had done some other vibe coding courses. I don't think I went as deep as you did into the process. And I loved how you used the tools to actually help you generate the descriptions for the LLMs. Like that was brilliant. So definitely should check it out. But what about, say, when you've already created something and you now want to take it to another level, or you want to maybe make a new version? What sort of things do you need to know? And I think you did touch on this a little bit, where you like somehow get the context out of what you did and then bring it somewhere else. How do you do that?
Yeah, so it's basically this question is like if you've arrived at an existing coding base, how do you add features and or like manipulate that code base more without all of the previous stuff?
Hmm. Correct. Yeah,
So in that case, you would it's gonna sound silly. Most of my answers to like all questions is AI,
that's
um,
right. Yeah,
which
that's
which is kind of ridiculous, but it's turtles all the way down, people. Um,
mhm,
so with an existing code base, what I would do is I would ask the AI to then review the code base. So if it's too big, so say the code base exceeds 1 million tokens, which
mhm,
is the biggest context window currently with AI. I would basically break off chunks of it. There's a certain feature I'm building. So if I'm building, I don't know, let's say I'm adding some widget to a dashboard that has tons and tons of code. I would say, hey, I want to add this widget to the dashboard. I know it's going to sit somewhere in this area. What I need you to do is I need you to scan the code base, figure out what code is associated to that feature. I then need you to create a specification from the existing code base that tells exactly what we need to do in the context associated code. And then from there, I would take that spec and then I would build a blueprint of saying, how do I go about doing this without breaking anything, ensuring that I follow the same security policies, ensuring all of these other things.
mhm.
So I'd basically use AI to create a series of documents. I would then use those documents to guide another subset of AIs to then develop the feature. So it's a very similar process, just from an existing starting point instead of nothing.
That's great. So I'm actually going to recommend a couple of things. I'm going to recommend that people take a look at something like GitHub, because it itself has sort of a tool embedded into it that understands your code base, as you said. So if you need to, sort of go to a place where people can look at an existing code base, if you put your content on GitHub, then you can pull up this built-in AI, right? And it has like an assistive version. So it's not like a chat GPT, but it knows that you're in this current repo, and then you can ask it something like, tell me what this repo is about. So it's going to understand the context of the current repository, and this might be a great place to start. Same thing with some of the other related tools like Codex, and GitHub also came up with something called Spaces that is similar, where all these tools are able to connect to repositories and understand the context of the repository. And then you can start asking questions where the tools have already absorbed the content, and you don't have to, like, you would have to, I guess, normally export your project, or maybe it is on GitHub, and then feed it into a tool. This way, you've kind of got that beginning part already done. Like you've already, like the tools already know not just your entire code base, but depending if you're like on an enterprise account, it will know all your code bases. And then it can understand that you're using this tool, but it needs to be related to this other tool. And so I think we're going to see, with Cloud Code and some of these other tools that can connect to multiple places like Codex. And this is a tool that I was telling you about, where I'm like, what's, I told it to basically look at the list of improvements, or create actually a list of improvements, or locate some bugs in a project. And then it would, because it's connected to my GitHub repo, it can go through and make a number of suggestions, and then it can generate an issue and a pull request that will automatically fix those issues for me. Pretty cool. And just imagine, like, I can't sometimes believe that these tools are so new. Um, and we're just like, think about where the world was like 2 years ago. This is a completely different world. And I can't imagine what it's going to be like 2 years from now, the tooling that we're going to have. But we're already seeing just the whole environment of programming change completely. So
Yeah, it's the quote that always gets me is that these are the worst they'll ever be, these
that's
models.
right. That's right. So
And
what
like
else are you working on these days? What else are you doing? I know you just released the course. So definitely you should check it out, and follow Dylan on LinkedIn for sure. And I'm sure you'll keep everybody sort of up to date on what you're doing if they follow you. But what else are you doing these days?
Yeah. So as you said, go to my LinkedIn's. All my stuff's there. There's one thing I recently released is a 30-day AI mastery series. So it's 30 emails and 30 days, and that'll basically walk you through a
So
bunch
this
of
one
different
here.
tips on how you can. Yep, right there. Boom, right at the top.
Oh, that's cool.
And
Nice.
it'll walk you through basically how to utilize AI effectively within your business.
Awesome.
And then
Cool.
also I have YouTube. So there's a YouTube linked in there as well. You can watch me talk about AI probably at least twice a week, and
Mhm.
different things that I do. And then also I post all kinds of good stuff on LinkedIn on a daily basis, Monday through Friday.
Yeah, here's your D squared YouTube. Definitely
Yeah,
check that out.
there it is.
This is probably one of the things that we like to see in instructors is kind of experience, like teaching. So I'm sure that having that YouTube really helped you get in here. So glad to have you in the group, and this was a fantastic discussion. I loved your course. I really, really did. I thought, wow, this is cool. Okay, another vibe coding course. Let's see what the difference is. And I think that they were so, like, our courses were so different that they're really complementary. And I love your approach of planning. It definitely doesn't kill the vibe as much as I said originally. It was a really good addition, and it really made me think about how else I could approach like preparing. Because when I saw that original Andrzej Karpathy quote, I was like, oh, let's just like wing it, and it was horrible. It's a horrible experience. So thanks for being here, man. We'll